Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to a new episode. In 23rd of May 2022, there was a protest at a graveyard in Bangkut village that lays in the Kashmir region. The mayor of that village, or the local Sarpanch as they call him, lead the protesters, because a newborn baby was announced dead and got buried 2 hours after birth. A stillborn baby. Locals protested over doctor's negligence that led to the death of a newborn baby, and quickly burying her in the nearest graveyard. The weird thing is when people exhumed the baby to take her body to move her to the family's cemetery. They found her alive, so they sent her back to the hospital to get proper care. Wait, Abo Mead. Who's still alive? You heard correctly, my friend. The baby that died 3 hours ago, including at least an hour buried underground, was still alive. Despite all the weird things about this news story, there's a particularly interesting sentence. Don't know if you noticed it. 23rd of May 2022. What about it, Abo Mead? I mean, it's not something that happened ages ago. It just happened. We, with all our doctors, medicine, Nobel Prizes, discoveries, and criteria, were not able to tell if a baby is dead or not. Here. A question needs to be asked. To this day, can a living person be treated as a dead body? Is taphophobia still a thing? Which is fear of being buried alive. The same phobia that Edgar Allan Poe had. Do people still have that? Are there still doctors, or in that case a whole hospital that can't tell if a patient is dead or alive? You might not find an answer. You might not grasp how complicated that question is, my friend. Unless you're a doctor, or a medical student. And even if you're a doctor, especially if you've just graduated, you might find the answer is very difficult. When does a living thing become dead? Difficult question. That, my dear doctor, reminds you of a familiar situation. When they wake you up at midnight, help. Grandma is sick. She can be having a heart attack, or agonal respiration, which is called gasping in English. You get up, run in your pajamas, get there, and she has stopped breathing. She isn't showing any signs of life. And poor you, only graduated weeks ago. You still haven't had real life experience. That's if you're not still a student, and don't know how to deal with someone dying. It's a difficult situation for you. Maybe you've taken a first aid course, or read about it, or seen videos, or you could make a quick decision to perform CPR, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation. You could grab your stethoscope and try to listen to the heart or lungs. Or, you could a bit smarter and try to do reflex tests. When they tap your knee, so you do this. However, you only remember a reflex test or two. So, you roll up a piece of cotton and swipe it across the eye. Why, Abo Mead? Naturally, patients blink involuntarily as a reflex action. That reflex indicates that the brain is working fine. When I touch the cornea of the eyelid should close and open, or just close. When I touch the eye, the brain should act quickly to try and protect it. Something like that indicates a functioning brainstem. But, it's a disaster if the patient didn't blink. His pupils are dilated and fixed. They don't even get smaller if we shine a light on them. Oh God. As a doctor, you're now in a tight situation. You rack your brain. According to your knowledge, this patient is dead. All that happened in 3 minutes. From the minute you heard the doorbell in your dreams, till the tell us, doctor. You slowly look around, and you see that all eyes are on you. In these eyes, there's a mix of fear, plea, and glorification. One word from you separates hope and despair. And with one word, you can bury this person alive. With one word, you can turn a child into an orphan, and a woman into a widow, or a sole inheritor waiting to be very rich. You wish you could say call an ambulance. However, you know that can't be said. Honestly, I don't know. I can't decide. I didn't study this yet. It's not that easy. I was absent that lecture. All that's going through your head in less than 3 seconds, given to you by God as extra time after the 3 minutes. So, you swallow nervously, avoid their eyes, and say, I'm sorry for your loss. How do we diagnose someone with death, my friend? Grab a pen and paper. We could try and poke needles under his nails, or in his heart. We could cut him up, burn him with red-hot metal and wait for a reaction. Or, we can blow steam into him, especially if he drowned and we can't tell. An anal steam injection to see if he will breathe and warm up, or will he keep pretending? Or, here's an idea. We'll grab a lead-based invisible ink, and we'll use it to write, I'm really dead, on a small paper. Then, we'll put that paper on the person's face who we want to confirm is dead. If he's dead, then his body will start to decompose and release sulfur dioxide. And that will react with the invisible ink and make it visible. So, the blank paper will show the phrase, "I'm really dead." A very dramatic way, as if we put the decision in the dead person's hands, so, it uttered the final call. That's silly, Abo Mead. Please, dear friend, don't rush to attack me. I did indeed take credit for the idea, but, you know it's not mine, my friend. And unfortunately, there were more dramatic people than me who said it. These were real and very old ways to diagnose death, said by the American writer and funeral director Caitlin Doughty in one of her famous books, Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? That's because declaring death was a problem back then too. True, it wasn't the same as today, and it wasn't only the doctor's problem, but we all know that the cultural and scientific advancement happened recently, which is commonly called the Industrial Revolution in early 19th century, which was last week compared to nations' years, my friend. The majority of the scientific advancement we live in, especially in medicine, is less than 200 years old. That's why it's very normal in a year like 1937, which isn't that long ago, to find people buried alive, like the French Angelo Hayes. A living person buried. Not just that, he wasn't rescued an hour later like the girl we talked about before. Nope, it was after 2 full days of being underground. 2 days. A guy who is alive underground. And the scientific reasoning behind his survival even after burial was that his oxygen consumption was very low. Because when he got into a motorcycle crash, and got brain damage that made his breathing really slow. The doctors checked his breathing for like half minute, and found nothing. That's it then. He hasn't been breathing for half a minute. Someone might say, that was a long time ago, Abo Mead, in the 40s. Old news. However, 1937 is not a long time ago. My friend, that's close to Joe Biden's birthday, or maybe your grandfather. Muhammad Hassam's grandfather was born exactly 1937. Doctors back then didn't know low respiratory rate was a thing, and that it could easily happen with a lot of common illnesses. For example, like the obstructive sleep apnea. And they used to identify death by checking for breath only a little bit, or by cardiopulmonary standards. That would naturally come to mind even if you weren't a doctor. I need to know if this person is dead or not. So, you check his pulse, listen to his heart, check his breath. And if nothing's there, then I'm sorry he's dead. Or, if you enjoy old black and white Arabic movies, you might do the magic trick. Lift his hand up, and if it dropped, then he's dead. Rest in peace. Honestly, I don't understand what that means. People went to medical school, graduated, left, and still don't know what it means. How do you know a person is dead by lifting his hand and dropping it? If I'm alive watching TV, and someone lifted my hands, I'll drop it too. It's one of the things that amazed doctors. Also, like hot water and giving birth. Why, guys, are we poaching the baby? Anyway, if you don't get your ideas from Arabic movies, then, just as you thought, you check pulse and breath. If there's none, then the guy is gone. All that was before 1968. Your father's birthday this time. Historically, it's not 2 days ago, it's yesterday. When we arrived at 1968, my friend, a huge scientific advancement had already happened, new questions emerged. Do we identify signs of life through pulses? What if there's no heart? For example, a patient getting a heart transplant. In the moments when we remove the old one and switch to the new one, what do we check? That guy for a period of time had no heart, does that mean he's dead? Forget about pulse. What about breathing? For example, removing a patient's lungs and putting him on a ventilator. We control his breathing with a push of a button. All these questions made Harvard University in 1968 formed an ad hoc committee to clearly redefine death on a better criteria that fits the new technology. This new definition was linked to the brain more than the heart and lungs. The definition of death became brain death. Or, in a simple and accurate way, brain death is all human death. Don't they say healthy body, healthy mind? Then it's dead body, dead mind. However, to define a dead or non-functioning brain, it's the permanent, irreversible, and complete loss of brain function. And that was put in a criteria named after the long-standing Harvard University. It was called Harvard Criteria. The criteria were, let's count, unreceptivity and unresponsitivity, no movements or breathing, no reflexes, and finally, when applying the electroencephalogram, EEG, test, a flat line appears. These are the new criteria for the definition of death. That were published in 1968. Before that, it was the doctor's decision. Go ahead, doctor. Decide if that person is dead or alive. However, after the Harvard criteria, hospitals now have a clear approach. But, let me tell you, my friend, that the law still wasn't clear up until a very important incident in the medical history for a girl called Karen Ann Quinlan. This incident changed everything. Long story short is that Karen, a girl in her early 20s, fell into a surprising and unexplainable coma in 1975. Doctors at Newton Memorial Center, a hospital in New Jersey, failed to diagnose or revive her. She was put on a ventilator, and she kept getting worse until she was diagnosed with irreversible coma. She was then transported to another hospital and was diagnosed with persistent vegetative state that we can translate into Arabic as vegetative state, related to vegetables. You might ask, what does that all mean? It all sounds a bit strange. What do you mean vegetative? She won't eat meat again? No, my friend. That's vegetarian when someone only eats vegetables. Vegetative means that she is a vegetable. A medical condition that describes a person who changed from being human to just a living thing. But, that's a complicated philosophical matter we can discuss in a later episode. Because we would have to turn away from the definition of death, and discuss the definition of humans. However, let's not get distracted, and get back to the story. Karen's story that I just told you was a huge inspiration for press, media, and even painters. She was the real representation of the Sleeping Beauty to them. But, that was only in their dreams. The reality was more painful. The girl was neither alive nor dead. Karen's family decided to take her off life support, since that there was no hope for her to wake up. The problem is that this was a crime in the eyes of the American law at the time. It's just like killing. If we remove life support, her breathing could stop and she would die. And because she might die, if that did happen, her family's request to the court was denied. So, they appealed to the Supreme Court of New Jersey. Imagine how the family felt at the time. And in May 1976, in a historic ruling of 7-0 votes, Karen's family finally won the appeal. And they were given the right to decide for their daughter. The legal justification was that doctors said there was no hope for recovery. So, there's no criminal offense, and it's not really killing. There is no criminal act. And if she did die, then it was a natural death for an actual reason that happened. The court appointed her adoptive father Joseph Quinlan to be her guardian, and that society has to accept his decisions. And indeed, life support was removed. However, the weird thing is that Karen, who is in a vegetative state, continued to live in her coma without ventilation for about 9 years. What? 9 years? Yes, my friend, 9 years. Not hours, not days. She lived for years. She died on June 11, 1985. Again, 9 years. Regarding the definition of death in the American law, and the right to live or die, and a patient's autonomy to make decisions, Karen's case started a whole new era. But, it's enough for us to know that one of the case's outcomes is the creation of ethics reflection groups in hospitals. You almost say that a whole branch in healthcare has evolved to solve similar cases, but, the important thing is the legislative development of definition of death. In 1981, a presidential commission with a big name was made. The President's Commission for the Study of Ethical Problems in Medicine and Biomedical and Behavioral Research. By the time you read the name, a patient is dead. Anyway, that commission would take individual statements from experts in different fields, like medicine, religion, and philosophy. And it relied on what these different experts from different fields agreed on, which is that complete brain death is enough to indicate someone's death. Period. There's an agreement from all different fields that this is death. Here, the commission published a guide called the Uniform Determination of Death Act. Or, as Americans like to nickname their laws, the UDDA. What a cute little law. The commission, my dear friend, recommended the following. An individual who has sustained either irreversible cessation of circulatory or respiratory functions, or irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem, is dead. A determination of death must be made in accordance with accepted medical standards. Here lies the catch. Firstly, this is just a recommendation and not obligatory, just like any other commission that is appointed by the American government. Why though? Why don't they listen to their commissions? Because, my friend, state laws are in the hands of state governments. Each state can pick and choose. Secondly, if you remember what we said before, this new definition brought back the heart and lungs criteria, despite the presence of ventilators and heart transplant surgeries. And it said that this is enough to diagnose death. Meaning, the complete irreversible failure of heart and lungs functions is enough, then we could say the patient is dead. Meaning, we don't have to check for a flatline in the EEG test. Now, you might think that this is a stupid commission. However, it mentions something really smart. Don't call it stupid, okay? Which is that the complete failure of the heart and lungs functions is no longer a significant sign in itself. However, it's an indication of brain death. Meaning, heart and lungs functions are not necessary for living, but their complete failure means death. Because if they're not working, then the bigger boss in charge isn't working either, and that the brain is gone. That means that the EEG test is an enough, but useless condition to diagnose death. Go again, ABO Mead. That means that the EEG test is an enough, but useless condition to diagnose death. Useless how? How enough, but useless? My friend, that means if we found the EEG line flat, then the patient is RIP dead, but it's useless, because if the EEG device is unavailable, then the complete irreversible failure of the heart and lungs is enough. We don't have to do the EEG to make sure. If those two failed, then that person is dead. And indeed, all 50 states applied their laws according to that recommendation with minor differences. Specifically because of that final line that says, in accordance with accepted medical standards. It's like blah blah blah, but according to rules. However, the biggest difference out of all is an exception put by which state? I don't know, ABO Mead. The only state we ever mentioned in this episode, my friend. It's New Jersey, where the law simply says that the patient's family and friends have the right to reject the death diagnoses on the basis of brain death for personal religious reasons. For example, if a doctor told me that this patient related to me is brain dead, which according to laws and regulations means that he's dead, I have the right as a family member to reject such diagnoses. I can say that death is related to the heart and lungs functions only. Sorry, ABO Mead. What does all this mean? Simply put, New Jersey decided that the determination of death based on the death of the brain is not acceptable for some people, especially on a religious basis. At the end of the day, it's death. And in all religions, death is a major thing. So, a doctor can't just tell me your son is dead. Meanwhile, I can still hear his heartbeat and see his chest moving. Even if it's just life support. You can't tell me I have to remove life support now, and he'll always be like that, and never recover or wake up, because his brain's supposedly dead. That is unacceptable to a lot of people. It's natural for them as a family to not lose hope, especially if the patient is a teenager or a kid, who fell into a coma, or a persistent vegetative state like Karen. Here, we're talking about a contradicting principle. Just like Karen's family wanted to show her mercy by removing life support, and they had full belief, along with the doctors and judges, that she'll die the moment life support is removed. Another kid's family could also want to show him mercy by keeping him on life support, and they could think that the doctors are purposefully trying to kill him. That exception gave New Jersey a reputation as the best place for brain-dead patients. As long as patients are on ventilators, then death is controversial. Even if the EEG is flat, and there's no electrical activity. The patient has no brain activity. The big boss has stopped working. If the family says he's not dead, then he's not, and what they say goes. In fact, all this bothered some scientists and specialists, and pushed away some doctors who thought, rightfully so, that they know better than families. All that could also put pressure on the limited medical supplies by keeping people in intensive care units even after they're basically dead. They could be using devices better off with someone else, meanwhile there's no hope for them. Discussion could have ended here, my friend. Since, it won't happen to many people, and not many of them will stay alive each year due to a single state's law. So, it's really no big deal. Do whatever you want. However, everything stayed the same. Until Jahi McMath started bleeding in California. This case is almost a test in all we just said. It's like there's a teacher trying to pop quiz medicine all the time. Now, pay attention. Jahi is an African-American 13-year-old girl. When she went to have a tonsillectomy and a septoplasty in 2013 with some extra details in Children's Hospital Oakland in North California. Surgery went fine, my friend. She woke up, but then later started to bleed from her mouth and nose, and it wasn't that bad. Doctors, thankfully, were able to effectively deal with the bleeding. However, a few hours later her heart and lungs function stopped. And after a fast CPR, in matter of 30 minutes, her heart was working and she was put on ventilation. However, her brain was severely impacted by what happened. So here, treatment was given to target the brain and lower the pressure. The next day, they applied the first electroencephalography on her, which is the EEG we mentioned before. This is natural procedure when brain death is a possibility. That's what happens when we doubt that someone's brain is dead, and the result was the flat line. That means that the brain is dead. Therefore, the person is also dead. And since we're in California, the law is clear, and it will be applied on the girl. The girl is dead, and the neurologist, after a few tests, has announced that if the same results appear after 6 hours, meaning if the EEG is still a flatline after 6 hours, then that means complete failure in the brain functions. And that's what happened in the next 24 hours. Every time they do the test, it's a flat line. So, she was announced dead on December 12 at 3 in the afternoon. And the diagnosis was complete brain death. Someone might ask, is that the story, ABO Mead? Of course not, my friend. Why? Because her mother rejected this diagnosis and denied it, and she asked for the treatment to continue. She can see her daughter alive, breathing, and her heart is beating. And the machines are making noises. And during the hospital discharge process, the mother sued. So, the court assigned Dr. Paul Fisher as a separate neurologist. He is the division chief of child neurology at Stanford University. This guy made a third EEG test 11 days after the death announcement. And the result was the same. The brain is gone. And he continued to do other detailed tests. That all boiled down to the fact that the brain is dead. That's it, so the girl is dead. Meanwhile, there are changes happening to the patient, just like any other patient in the ICU. Her blood pressure is unstable, even though her brain is bead. There are changes in hormones and electrolytes, even though her brain is bead. Her temperature drops, and the hospital deals with it. And her parents are trying to move her to another hospital. But, the hospital insists that she's a body. And in early January, the ICU neurologist gave the court a report that says that the girl actually died 3 weeks ago. And that all the ongoing treatment, and her family's orders are only dealing with a body slowly decomposing. These aren't signs of life. What we're doing isn't treating a living sick person. The judge was influenced by this logic. He did rule for the family to take custody, but with a December 12 death certificate, and reason of death is pending investigation. Her family was able to move her by an air ambulance to an unknown destination. But, of course you know where. Where, my friend, is the only place that will accept a brain-dead case, with a death certificate other than a graveyard. Correct, my friend, it's New Jersey. Just like the powerful expression written in one of the most important reports that talked about Jahi's case. The moment that aircraft crossed New Jersey's borders, the girl was legally resurrected. Maybe her brain was dead, but in the eyes of the New Jersey law, she was no longer dead. When the patient was transferred to SPU Hospital, there was a single goal. To insert a feeding tube to stop getting salines, and they happened without any problems. She stayed in the hospital for 230 days. And then she was transferred to her home with a ventilator and a 24-hour nurse supervision. So, without annoying you with all the details that happened later, the girl stayed alive at home and for years. With the exception of going to the hospital to get a few surgeries and treatments, she lived at home with the least possible facilities. And she died on June 22, 2018. She died after 4 years, 6 months, 10 days, 6 hours and 8 minutes from her first death announcement in California. Now, she's the only person in the world that has 2 legally acknowledged official death certificates. You'd think the story ends here. But, the biggest surprise in that story is not only that the girl lived, she also hit puberty. What? She hit puberty. She had her first menstrual cycle at the SPU hospital, and specifically in August 2014. It lasted 3 days. Now, the doctor, who said she was a dead body that died 3 weeks earlier, and won his case in court, could say that this is a part of decomposition. The discharge of old blood from an opening in the body. However, the real strange thing is that hair started growing on her body, and her breasts started to grow. Jahi was, by some definition, alive, growing, maturing, and preforming biological processes with rare efficiency, with respect to her condition in nutrition. Not just that, we're not done yet. What's even weirder is that, remember her brain that showed a flat line and another flat line 24 hours later? And then another flat line 3 weeks later? Which all meant that the brain is dead, and stopped working. No, my friend. Her brain started functioning again. Another EEG test was made more than once, and with the testimony of specialists, there were waves. It was no longer flat. with addition to the MRI scan that indicated a functioning brain. In an amazing testimony by a separate neurologist who was following up with Jahi, his name is Dr. Alan Schumann, a UCLA University pediatric neurologist, said that he went to visit her in the ICU 1 week before her death. And her mother called her saying, "Jahi, Dr. Alan is here to visit you. Show him you're conscious and can hear us, and move your right hand." The doctor says that the girl immediately moved her hands, slowly and indeliberately. Not just a random tremble in her hand. He said that was the only motion during the 30-minute visit that she expressed. She responded to a single request. And that for him means that this motion wasn't just a coincidence between a direct request and random continuous movements. No, it seemed to be a motion in response to a request. The amazing thing is the girl wasn't only alive and well, she was almost conscious, probably even to her final days in that miserable coma. Jahi's case broke all the rules. Ones that medicine thought were stable. The bottom line of all this says that conclusive tests, or the ones we think are conclusive like the EEG, could give us false positive results. Just like any other. And it seems like us as doctors are not in full control as we think we are. And we don't have enough abilities to determine death, so, neither death announcements, nor its causes, nor its precise timings. This announcement has consequences and effects on inheritances, on organ donation to save others' lives, on insurance, criminal acts, and judiciaries. These are just examples, and there are many more for the power and responsibility that are completely on the shoulders of doctors and hospitals in modern culture. There are studies that are still being written on Jahi's case. She also gets entire segments in medical ethics conferences, and she could change laws and history. Jahi's case could be a relief to our poor little doctor, who is trying, but can't fall asleep, after he shocked people that their grandma is dead. The story we told earlier. He asks himself existential questions. How can't I, a doctor, tell apart life from death? Isn't that supposed to be lecture number 0 in our first year? Don't worry too much, and go to sleep, doctor. You tried. Even scientists in Stanford are in disagreement with their colleague at UCLA. They're tearing each other apart in researches and meetings, and courts, as well. Every time you think you might have buried someone alive, remember that Jahi lived more than 4 years with a death certificate in the most advanced medical place on Earth, the United States of America. Death is definitely larger than all this. It's all just disagreements on how to diagnose death, and only in certain cases, but it's not to explain death. On the contrary, it's to give it a medical definition, and for practical reasons only. Just to move a little forward. Death is a thing of value, religion, and culture. Every nation should with it based on that. And we'll always have to abide by what other progressive nations had discovered, as long as we haven't reached any tangible scientific fact in our modern age yet. Despite any ancient history that ended, whose grandsons are facing new questions that they don't have answers to. Maybe the correct answer will be found by our poor little doctor, if he asked his grandmother about death. Then she'll probably tell him it's going up to God, or to a higher power. Either way he'll hear something about souls exiting the body. However, if he asked her how to know if someone's dead, then she probably won't know, since humanity doesn't know to this day. The truth is, my friend, that we probably to this day don't have an answer to happens when we die, or how to know when we're dead. But, we do know other things. Like what? Like, what were the old episodes about? And what will the new episodes be about? And what, or who is in the sources? And if anything died in the episode, then its end.